Well, thank you so much for having me here. Well, my name is Dr. Peter Vincent Fry. I'm the Chief of Staff of the Congressional EMP Commission, that is the Electromagnetic Pulse Commission. And we have been trying to get the country protected on an accelerated basis from the existential threat that faces us from EMP. I don't know what background your audience has on EMP, but let me start with the basics, sort of physics 101 about what is an electromagnetic pulse. An EMP can be made by nature, by a solar flare, or by man, by nuclear weapon detonated in outer space, basically high above the atmosphere, of an altitude of 30 kilometers, or by non-nuclear weapons. Now, let's talk about the natural EMP threat first. Maybe I should go back even further and talk about originally what is an EMP. If you understand how a lawnmower starts, you can understand an EMP, because you create a little EMP every time you start your lawnmower. Basically, when you pull on the lanyard on the lawnmower, you spin a cluster of batteries called a magneto. This causes a moving magnetic wave. The magnetism induces electrons to flow in a coil that surrounds the magneto. And you can see this generating a small electromagnetic pulse because it sparks the spark plug on your lawnmower. It makes the lawnmower run. So in effect, what EMP is a moving magnetic field that will generate currents in a wire. And that's all that it is. It's the same thing that happens in the heart of your lawnmower. Now, the Earth is a giant magnet, and it's got a north and a south pole, and it's surrounded by a magnetic field that we call the magnetosphere. And every now and then, well, in fact, every year, that magnetosphere gets hit by coronal mass ejections from the sun. These are basically big blobs of ionized plasma that get hurled out of the sunspots. That's why NASA is so concerned whenever the sun lines up with the Earth and a sunspot is facing us, because a coronal mass ejection comes out of those sunspots on occasion, and it can hit the Earth. We're basically in a game of Russian roulette with the sun. And every year we have geomagnetic storms that are caused by these blobs of ionized plasma called coronal mass ejections that hurl out of the sun, traveling 1 million miles an hour. And they take a few days, about 72 hours, to cross the gap, the space from 96 million miles from the sun to Earth. And when they hit the Earth, the reason the Earth isn't destroyed is because the magnetosphere protects us. But in the process of protecting us, this blob of ionized plasma traveling at 1 million miles an hour gets distorted. It wobbles around, and so you have a huge magnetic field moving that generates currents and wires on the surface of the Earth. And this is what a geomagnetic storm is. And they happen all the time, several times yearly, when you have a normal geomagnetic storm. And they can cause problems with power grids and communications and airline traffic at high northern latitudes. Those are normal geomagnetic storms. But what we're concerned about here is the once-in-a-100-year geomagnetic superstorm, like the Carrington event that happened in 1859, which is the most powerful solar superstorm known to us. And that was over 100 years ago. Every now and then, every century or so, the sun will shoot out a coronal mass ejection that's traveling, that has a lot more energy than the normal coronal mass ejection, traveling much faster than 1 million miles an hour. I told you it takes several days for a normal coronal mass ejection to reach the Earth. The Carrington event reached the Earth in only 11 hours because it was traveling so fast. And these things are enormous. They're many times larger than the size of the Earth. And when Carrington struck the Earth, it caused the magnetosphere to move around everywhere. And it caused a naturally generated electromagnetic pulse everywhere on the surface of the Earth. Now, in 1859, we were not an electronic civilization. We were a horse and buggy civilization. But primitive electronics in the form of telegraphs had been deployed everywhere. There were telegraph stations practically following all the railroads. Everywhere a railroad was built, they would put up a telegraph station. And the colonial powers that were carving out empires in Africa and China and India built railroads everywhere, put up telegraph stations everywhere. The United States, had telegraph systems. We had just laid the transatlantic cable in 1859 that connected North America to Europe. And everywhere in the world, the telegraph systems were damaged or destroyed, or some kind of a problem was associated with them because of the natural EMP that resulted from the Carrington event. In some cases, the power was so great that telegraph stations burned down and telegraph keys actually melted. The transatlantic cable that was miles deep, the pulse was so powerful that the EMP reached down miles deep into the Atlantic Ocean and destroyed the transatlantic cable, which had to be laid again by the Great Eastern. And forest fires broke out all over the world because of the telegraph lines in many places in the world bursting in flame from the power of that pulse. Now, if an 1850 civilization didn't end because it was a horse and buggy civilization and electricity was in its infancy in terms of our dependence on it. But that has changed now. Electricity is no longer in its infancy. We are an electronic civilization. Electronics support everything. The economy, communications, even food and water depend directly or indirectly upon electricity. And if we were to lose the electric grid and electronic devices, the planet could not sustain the population that it sustains now. We as a country could not sustain the 320 million Americans that live here now. We're only able to do that because of technology. And you have to think of EMP, whether it's a natural EMP or a nuclear EMP or a non-nuclear EMP attack, as an anti-technology weapon that basically subtracts technology, modern electronic technology, from our society. The pulse itself does not directly harm people, but it indirectly can kill far more people than even the nuclear weapon detonated in the city. So that's how a natural EMP works. What about the nuclear EMP? In the case of the Carrington event, the EMP was everywhere and affected the whole planet simultaneously. And we are overdue for a natural EMP Carrington event. We were almost struck by a Carrington-class geomagnetic superstorm in 2012, July 23rd, 2012. A Carrington-class coronal mass ejection crossed the path of the Earth and missed us by just 3 days. And had it struck, NASA estimates that billions of lives would have been at risk worldwide with the loss of electric power and all the life-sustaining critical infrastructures. NASA estimates the likelihood of a Carrington-class geomagnetic superstorm is 12% per decade because we are overdue for one. And that virtually guarantees within our lifetimes and within our children, we will experience this natural catastrophe that is a natural EMP. The nuclear EMP is caused when you detonate a nuclear weapon in outer space above the atmosphere. For example, in the magnetosphere. The fireball from the nuclear weapon can cause the magnetosphere to move back and forth, and again, you get a moving magnetic field as a result of that explosion above the atmosphere. There's other things that also happen that are rather technical that I won't get into here, but it generates other kinds of EMP that nature doesn't make. And one that we're most concerned about, the EMP unique to a nuclear weapon, called E1 EMP. And this is an electromagnetic shock wave that is much more powerful, that has much more energy packed into it than a natural EMP. Whereas a natural EMP can create, maybe 20, 30 volts per meter on the ground. And a super EMP weapon could generate 200,000 volts per meter. And the frequency is so small, because it's a high-frequency event, that unlike the natural EMP can't directly couple into your personal computers or small electronic devices or into automobiles, for example. But a nuclear EMP can. And so it would directly damage automobiles, airplanes, the personal computer on your desk. And the damage that a nuclear EMP does is much deeper than the EMP from the sun. However, a nuclear EMP, would not, with a single nuclear weapon, you wouldn't be able to make an EMP that would cover the whole world. You could cover a continent. A single nuclear weapon detonated, let's say, 300 kilometers in both North America, would generate an EMP field covering all 48 contiguous United States, most of Canada, and part of Mexico, and have this deep damage that I'm describing. Does that make a nuclear EMP worse than a natural EMP? In some respects, yes, but not really. Because it takes about 3 days. We've only got about enough emergency generation in places like hospitals and food warehouses and elsewhere for about 72 hours of emergency generating power. And once those batteries are exhausted, and once the fuel supplies are exhausted, you end up in exactly the same place with a natural EMP that you would with a nuclear EMP. So the difference between a nuclear EMP attack and a natural EMP from the sun are twofold. First, the natural EMP could affect the whole world if we're talking about a geomagnetic superstorm. But in order to get to that immediate disaster that is caused by a nuclear EMP, the difference is 3 days. In 3 days, you end up in basically the same situation for both kinds of attack, for the area that's affected by the EMP field. Now, the third kind of EMP that we're concerned about is by non-nuclear weapons, radio frequency weapons. This doesn't get a lot of attention, but it should, because you don't need a nuclear weapon to do one of these EMPs. You can actually make non-nuclear EMP weapons from design information available on the internet and assemble them from common electronic parts available in hardware stores. You can also buy devices that are intended to be used for peaceful diagnostic purposes. There's even one advertised in electronic magazines called the EMP suitcase. It's not intended to be used as a weapon. It's intended to be used as a diagnostic tool. The idea here, you need the EMP briefcase when you're laying out, for example, on the floor of a factory, and you have heavy electronic equipment. Instead of having to move the electronic equipment around, you can use the EMP suitcase to simulate that electronic equipment to see how far apart you have to space things so that the electronic equipment doesn't fratricide each other and burn each other out with their electromagnetic transients, or how thick do the walls have to be to separate this equipment so that it's safe. And it can save you a lot of expense and trouble and save your equipment by doing a simulation using the EMP briefcase. So it's intended for peaceful purposes. But it puts out 100,000 volts per meter over a relatively short range. All these non-nuclear EMP weapons have only short range of less than a kilometer. Nonetheless, if a terrorist or a criminal or a madman purchased one of these devices or built one from design information on the internet, he could put it in the trunk of a car and drive to an extra high voltage transformer substation and destroy the SCADAs in that substation that regulate the way the electricity flows into the transformer, cause the transformer to fail. So we've arrived at a place where a single individual equipped with an EMP weapon, a radio frequency weapon, could basically topple the technological pillars of civilization for a major metropolitan area, cause a protracted blackout that might last weeks or months for a major city. And if this person drove around to other transformer substations, he might be able to black out the whole country. We know from an unclassified report by the U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that if you knew which, there are like 2,000 extra high voltage transformer substations in this country, and if you knew which 9 are particularly important, and just took out those 9, you could put the whole country into a protracted blackout that would threaten millions of lives. The EMP Commission on which I serve estimates that if you had a blackout that lasted 1 year, 90% of the American people would probably perish from from starvation, disease, and societal collapse. Because we don't know how to keep 320 million people alive without food or water. That's what it comes down to. Immediately, pure food, pure water would cease. You need huge amounts of electricity to purify water and to pump it into cities where our population is concentrated. When the lights go out, and the pressure in the pipes fails, which would be very shortly after a blackout, there's no more water. And as for the food, we only have a 30-day food supply in this country, 30 days of food. And it's not government-owned food. It's in the big regional warehouses that service the grocery stores. They have to get their food by truck every 72 hours to 24 hours from these big regional food warehouses. It's only 30 days there to feed the population at normal consumption rates. And when the automobiles fail because they don't have gas or because they've been knocked out by a nuclear EMP, there's no way of transporting the food from the regional food warehouses. And typically, these regional food warehouses only have emergency power for 72 hours. So in 3 days, that 30-day food supply will begin to spoil. And how do you keep 320 million people alive with no food and water? We as a commission looked at that for 8 years, and we don't know how. So given our current state of unpreparedness, it is likely we would lose not just millions of people, but hundreds of millions of people in the aftermath of an EMP catastrophe, whether it was induced by a natural EMP, or by a nuclear EMP attack, or by a non-nuclear EMP attack that used multiple weapons to try to take down the grid. Now the third part, or the final part of this story that people need to know in terms of the threat, is that the Chinese, the Russians, the North Koreans, and the Iranians, and terrorists, they all know about EMP. They've incorporated it into their military plans against us. And they have come up with a new revolution, what they call a revolution of military affairs. And it is indeed a revolution of military affairs. They call it various things: total information warfare, all-out cyber warfare, electronic warfare. They call it everything but nuclear warfare. You see, they don't consider a nuclear EMP attack, the use of a nuclear weapon to be made, to make an EMP attack, to be an act of nuclear war. In the doctrines of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, they regard that as cyber warfare or information warfare, or what I call blackout war. Some people in the U.S. Army War College call it cybernetic. Still others call it combined arms cyber warfare. Because what they plan to do is use multiple means to attack our electric grids and our critical infrastructures. Using cyber attacks, physical sabotage, non-nuclear EMP weapons, and ultimately, the ultimate cyber weapon in their view is a nuclear EMP event, where they would use a nuclear weapon. Any one of these things, cyber, non-nuclear EMP weapons, physical sabotage, and nuclear EMP itself, any one of them by itself would be enough to take down the grid, black out all the life-sustaining critical infrastructures, and end our civilization. But they have a plan that combines all these things, so it would be irresistible. And that's what they would hope. They hope that we will remain ignorant and do nothing to protect our electric grid, so that this attack would be irresistible. Just like the Western democracies, I think it is akin to the blitzkrieg developed by Nazi Germany in World War II, the blitzkrieg in cyberspace. It uses multiple vectors of attack. The Nazis had come up with their version of a revolution of military affairs called the blitzkrieg, that used armor in combination with air power, mobile infantry, and mobile artillery, all used in combination to defeat the trench warfare that the Western democracies thought would be the character of war during World War II. And we didn't understand. Only a handful of people like Winston Churchill and General J.F.C. Fuller understood the Nazi blitzkrieg before the war happened. And most elites would not listen to Churchill. They thought he was crazy. They thought, no, not only will nobody ever start another war because World War I was so terrible, but if there is another war, it's going to be just like the last one. It'll be like World War I, where we rely on trenches and barbed wire and there will not be movement on the battlefield. Whoever's on the offensive will be at a great disadvantage. But the Blitzkrieg restored the advantage to the aggressor, and it did it in such a decisive way that the Nazis came one small step from being able to conquer the world. They overran Europe in less than a year. And the only reason they were stopped from victory is because Russia and the United States and our allies had to learn how to fight a better blitzkrieg on the battlefields of Russia, on the deserts of North Africa, and on the battlefields of Europe, at the cost of 30 million lives. We can't afford to make a mistake like that again. We can't afford to learn how to defeat this new way of warfare which our enemies plan to use against us. Nor can we wait for the sun to inflict a natural catastrophe upon us. And this is what the Commission has been warning and trying to get our government to do for 16 years now, frankly. For the 8 years when the EMP Commission was first established between 2001 and 2008, then I had my EMP task force that picked up where the EMP Commission left off. And now, since 2015, Congress reestablished the EMP Commission. And we're fighting again to try to get the government to protect the electric grid and the other critical infrastructures. And the reason I and many others have devoted their professional lives to this is because still very few people understand the EMP threat. And it's been an enormous educational process. Up until 2008, when the EMP Commission published its reports, much of what I'm telling you was deeply classified. And so many people still think that the EMP threat that I'm describing is science fiction and not real. I'm unhappy to have to tell you this evening that I had a conversation today with a colleague in the White House who talked to a scientist who was a holdover from the Obama administration, who thought the EMP was science fiction. He didn't understand the EMP threat. Here we have had a person working in the White House science staff for 8 years who was ignorant of this threat. That's incredibly dangerous, and that we would have at such a high level in our government people that are still ignorant of this threat, despite all our efforts to educate the people. And so that's where we are. And the other reason we have dedicated our professional lives to doing this is there is a good news part to this story. And that is that there is no excuse for this country to be vulnerable to EMP. We have known for 50 years how to protect our military forces and have been protecting at least parts of our military forces, not all of them, as many people misunderstand, but at least our strategic nuclear forces, our command and control systems associated with nuclear forces, and our high-level executive communications have been protected from EMP for 50 years. So we know how to protect the electric grid. The EMP Commission thinks we could do it for about $2 billion, by putting in the Faraday cages and the surge arresters and the blocking devices that are necessary to protect the SCADAs and the transformers and the other vital equipment from EMP. $2 billion. That's what we give away in foreign aid to Pakistan every year. If we spend foreign aid to Pakistan for just 1 year and spend it on the security of the American people, it would be a giant step toward making this problem go away. So why haven't we? It's been 8 years since the EMP Commission made its recommendations. Why haven't we protected the grid in all this time? Well, first, we've had this hiatus with the Obama administration coming in that never liked anything nuclear, didn't care for nuclear threats. And as I described, he even had people advising him that were grossly ignorant of the fundamental facts. But it wasn't just the Obama administration. Even now, we face opposition from the electric power industry that doesn't understand the threat either, but knows that it doesn't want to spend a penny on protecting against EMP or cyber attacks or physical sabotage. It's not because they're evil, but it's because the electric power industry is not part of our national security apparatus. They're a completely different culture. Their goal is to make money, to make profit, and that's what they should be doing. But we have no department or agency that is responsible for overseeing the electric power industry to see that public safety and national security is ensured. and that would be able to compel them, that has the legal authority to be able to compel them to protect the grid. They have been very successful in setting things up so they basically regulate themselves. They're the last critical infrastructure in this country that, in effect, regulates itself. And the government, the federal government at least, up to this point, hasn't had the power to order them to protect the grid. And this is unlike the situation with any other critical infrastructure. Look at transportation, for example, the airline industry. I like to think of the airline industry as an example. We have the Federal Aviation Administration, which does have the power to ground anybody's aircraft. If we discover that there's some kind of a design flaw in the aircraft, they can ground the fleet until that problem is repaired. When an airliner crashes, it's not the airline industry that investigates the crash, it's the FAA. They drag the debris into a hangar, and you have an objective actor find out what went wrong. Why do we do that? Because we can't trust those who are driven by the profit motive, chiefly, to take care of public safety and national security. Hundreds of lives are at stake when airplanes fly. We want to make sure an objective actor is making sure that those people are safe. Same thing, that's why we have a pure Food and Drug Administration. We don't trust the industry to regulate itself. We have objective people, to make sure that the drugs are safe. We have a Nuclear Regulatory Commission, similarly, to oversee nuclear power plants, to ensure for the nuclear safety of the nuclear power industry. This is not the case at the federal level. It's starting to change. We're hoping that laws will get passed by Congress, that President Trump will sign executive order that will turn this around so that at the national level, we will do what is necessary to protect the grid. But in the meantime, I wouldn't wait on Washington, because Washington doesn't do things well. Even when it's under Republican administrations, it doesn't do things well. And this country was never designed by our founding fathers to be run out of Washington. In the 20th century, we've had this enormous distortion that's been going on for many decades in the balance of power between the states and federal government, so that we're now almost an imperial system where the people think everything has to come out of Washington. Governance is supposed to chiefly come out of Washington. And you can tell this just by turning on the nightly news every night. All the focus is what goes on in Washington. And we've become obsessed with presidential elections because it's almost like presidents now have the power the Roman emperors used to have. That all decision-making has to be done there in Washington by the president, by the Congress. That's not how this country was originally envisioned. Power and most governance was supposed to be done from the states. And at the level of the states, you will find that state governments actually do have the authority to regulate grids. Most state assemblies and governors do have homeland security powers that would enable them to order the electric utilities to protect the grid. So I encourage my audiences not to wait for Washington. Yes, we need to try to move Washington along, try to get Washington to do the right things, to help us achieve a solution at the federal level. But we shouldn't be waiting for Washington. There are things that can be done at the state level. Governors can sign an executive order ordering the grid protected. The state legislatures that oversee the electric utilities do have the power in most states to order the grid to be protected. And so I've reached out to states, and we've gotten legislation passed in states like Maine, and Florida, and Arizona, and elsewhere. We've had legislation passed recently in Texas. Not as good as we would like, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. And most of the progress that's been made in this country in protecting the electric grid is not coming out of Washington, but it's coming out of the states. Now, Washington did do something last year. At the last legislative minute last year, they passed a bill called the Critical Infrastructure Protection Act that for the first time requires the Department of Homeland Security to start planning and preparing for an EMP event, to protect our country, but also to work with the states, so that the states can get technical advice from the Department of Homeland Security, and maybe even financial help from the Department of Homeland Security to protect their grids. And that is the strategy. Right now it's a 2- or 3-pronged approach, to try to make progress at the federal level, but also to try to make progress at the state level. So we're attacking the bridge from both ends. And there are things people can do for their families and their individual communities as well. And that's the last thing we're talking about. Because it used to be, we've been transforming into a different kind of people than we used to be in the past. And here I speak for myself, not for the Congressional EMP Commission. There was a time, I think of my father's generation, the generation that survived the Great Depression and World War II. They were very suspicious of government. They never had this expectation that Washington was the center or locus of all competency. They had seen government fail in war and peace. My father, he fed his family through the Great Depression by hunting woodchucks and fishing. It wasn't just for sports and recreation. It was to survive. When I was growing up, we only had about a quarter acre of land, and every inch of it was farmed. My Uncle Joe, who lived down in Utica, New York, he had a restaurant, a bar. He had the backyard behind his establishment that was half the size of the room I'm speaking in. I'm speaking in a 12 by 12 living room here. And it was half the size of that. He had a little victory garden back there because they all had the expectation that someday the federal government would fail again, and there would be another Great Depression, or there might be a nuclear war, but something would happen. Their society would fail catastrophically, the way it did during the Great Depression, or that we would be attacked by another enemy, as almost happened in World War II, and as everybody expected to happen during the early Cold War. And the people would have to take care of themselves again. And there was an expectation that the first line of defense for every American was themselves, that you would take care of your own family. And there was a pride in that. People didn't want to take handouts from the government and didn't want to be told by the government what to do. And people didn't count on this fiction that government would be there to rescue you in 72 hours, no matter what happened. Yet something has been happening as the great generation that won World War II and survived the Great Depression dies out and the new generation replaces them. There seems to be this naive faith in government at all levels, the expectation that government will deliver on promises to be there to rescue the people no matter what happens. And yet we have seen that promise fail over and over again in things like Hurricane Andrew, Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy, where they are not there in 72 hours. And people unfortunately, rely on that false promise. And many people have lost fortunes and even their lives because of their lack of preparedness. And so that is my last message to you. I think we need to become a people. I think that great generation was the last of our pioneer stock. And they had the virtues and values that the founders had in mind. Our constitutional republic was designed for a particular kind of American character. And that was an American character that was suspicious of government and that was jealous of its freedom. And that people that wanted to be self-sufficient and had rugged individualism and wanted to rely on themselves to take care of themselves and their family. That's the kind of person this society was designed for. And those are the virtues that made this country great and free. We need those virtues again, not only to survive, but I believe in the long run, to become great and free again. So those are my remarks for this evening. I think I'm talking to like-minded people because you took the time to be here in this late talk about such an esoteric and depressing topic. So my hat is off to you. So I'll throw it open to, if there are, I don't know if we can take questions and answers in this format, but if we can, I would welcome any questions or comments the audience might have. If you're living in a big city, I would encourage you to try, if you've got a place in the country, I would get away from the big population centers. Or if you've got friends who live in the country, or family who lives in the country, I would encourage you to go and live with them. I would encourage you to try to take some steps if you're in a major metropolitan area and you don't have these options. There are things you can do to be prepared where you are. I mean, everybody should have a food supply, a water supply, or at least know how to filter and purify water. There are manuals you can get on the internet, that don't cost anything, that can explain that. If you had a garbage can, for example, and put holes in the bottom of it and filled it with blankets, sand, and charcoal, you can make your own water filter, that would purify even the worst water. But, you could store water. That's going to be the biggest thing. Having a water supply. If you live in the suburbs, you might want to consider getting a swimming pool. A typical swimming pool has got 20,000 gallons of water. I mean, that would give you your own little reservoir that would, that would last for you and your neighborhood practically forever. Have an emergency generator, solar panels if you can afford them, a medicine kit, and know how to use it. So those are things I would start thinking about. Where am I located? How dangerous is it here? Can I afford to stay here? Is it going to be safe for me to stay here with my family? And you have to think about a protracted blackout, a situation where the lights are going to be off, the water is going to be off. You're not going to be able to rely on electronics for a protracted period of time, months, and possibly years. Even if you take limited preparation, it greatly increases the chances of survival for your family. And I would just start beginning to prepare. I like to use that example. Let's think about the threat of fire, for instance. A terrible way to die. And it sounds like such a horrific thing when you look at the victims of fire. But how can we possibly survive a fire? Well, if you spend $20 on a smoke alarm, and that's all you do, you greatly increase the likelihood that your family and yourself will never fall victim to a fire. So a minor, small investment like that, greatly increases the odds for you. And the odds go up even further if you buy fire extinguishers, and if you bother to spend a lot of money and invest a sprinkler system in your house. The odds get better and better and better. But even if you only do the bare minimum and have a smoke alarm in your house, it greatly increases your chances of being able to survive a fire. Same thing with EMP. Even if you just do a little bit, relative to people who do nothing, you're going to be much better off. Yes, it is. Some home generators even basically come in a metal box that can be converted to a Faraday cage quite easily. Or you can put the generator in a homemade Faraday cage quite easily, which is basically a metal shed, that is designed in such a way that a current will flow through it. It's electromagnetically contiguous. A simple example of a Faraday cage is a garbage can with a tight-fitting lid. If you had a garbage can with a tight-fitting lid and you had some kind of electronic equipment that you wanted to survive, even from a super EMP weapon, if you put that equipment in a plastic bag and then put it inside the garbage can and close the lid, it would survive. What happens is the pulse encounters the garbage can and it gets short-circuited. The pulse flows round and round the garbage can and will not touch the equipment inside. Now you have to insulate that equipment so it doesn't touch the inside metal walls of the garbage can. That's why you put it in a plastic bag. But that's basically the concept. And you can modify even a shed that's got a window in it. For example, it doesn't have to be solid metal. If you put chicken wire over a window and have the metal chicken wire connected to the metal sides of the shed so that it will carry a current, you can convert even a metal shed with a window in it into a functional Faraday cage. Another thing that can be done, if you don't want to go through the trouble of doing a Faraday cage, please, if you've got an emergency generator already, look at the mode. A lot of people, they've started this option, or there's this function that's on these emergency generators that I wish they didn't include it. On most emergency generators now, there's a setting you can set the emergency generator so it's on automatic or manual. If it's manual, you have to come outside when there's a blackout, if there's an EMP or something. But when the blackout happens, you have to go outside and manually start the generator by pushing the button, okay? And that's what you should do. You should have your emergency generator on manual. If you leave it on automatic, what happens is it saves you the trouble of having to leave your house to start the generator, because when the generator will detect when the lights go out, when there's a power surge or a power failure, it detects that because it's connected into the house. But the problem is if there's an EMP and you've got it on automatic, the EMP will go right through into the generator and damage the generator. So that convenience, that labor-saving convenience, just so that people don't have to walk outside and turn the generator on manually, puts all these generators at risk, because almost everybody is going to keep it on automatic, which puts the generator at risk. So even if you just do that, you've already got a generator, even if it's not in a Faraday cage, okay, at least don't put it on automatic. At least keep it on manual. That would greatly increase the likelihood the generator will survive. Is the natural gas being pumped in from outside, or do you have a propane tank?
Pumped in from outside.
Oh, that's not good. Not only is that a hazard, but these natural gas lines are a real fire hazard in an EMP. The cicadas will spark, and the natural gas lines, the EMP will actually couple into the gas pipelines, the natural gas pipelines, and you can get explosions and fires. There's likely to be firestorms in cities because of the gas pipelines going up. Now, if it was self-contained, if your system was self-contained and you had a propane tank on your property, I used to have a propane tank when I had a farm on the Chesapeake Bay. You can have a propane tank that would give you 6 months or even more. That whole arrangement is because the pipeline, because it's compact, it's not long, the EMP is not likely to couple into that. And also because the propane tank is underground. But if your propane is coming in from the outside, it's just like your house being connected to the big grid. The big grid is going to collect all that EMP and channel it into your house. And the natural gas pipelines are going to pick up EMP and channel that into whatever connectivity you have to the natural gas. And so you're kind of getting a double whammy for having the natural gas. You've already got the big grid to deal with. Now you've got the natural gas pipeline as a problem. Well, you're asking me that as an American who lives in, this is Louisiana, correct?
Yes, sir.
Right. You're living someplace not inside the Beltway of Washington, D.C. So the simple answer to that question, I would say, is zero. That no real progress has been made in protecting the electric grid.
In the country or Louisiana?
Well, when they think of progress, they think of, well, are they installing Faraday cages? Are they putting in the surge arresters? Are they taking the technical steps that are necessary to protect the grid? That's a common sense expectation. That's the common sense kind of thing that people would expect when they say progress is being made. Now, in Washington, however, the Government Accountability Office last year did a study on how much progress is being made to implement the EMP Commission recommendations. And they had in big letters on the front of the cover that great progress is being made, but there are still room for improvement. And when you got into the report, if you read that report and find out, well, what did they mean by progress? They measured progress by how many meetings are being held, how many studies are being done, how many think tanks are being hired to think about this problem. And that's progress in Washington. If you're writing papers and having meetings and talking about the problem and having congressional hearings and briefings and stuff, that's progress. And that's considered actually solving the problem. Even though it doesn't actually do anything to physically protect the grid. You actually had to go into an appendix in that report to find out Well, what actual steps recommended by the EMP Commission had been taken to protect the grid? What technical steps had actually been taken? And buried deep in an appendix, if you got far enough into the report to read that appendix, it was none. That's the truth. The true story is in that appendix, not on the front cover of the GAO report. Well, my boss, the chairman of that commission, is the free world's foremost expert in EMP. He's a gentleman named Dr. William R. Graham, who most people have never heard of. But not only is he the free world's foremost expert, I think he's one of the great scientific minds that's ever been produced by the world. This man was, when I was in, I believe I was in first grade, when Dr. Graham was a young defense scientist who was sent to the Hawaiian Islands to figure out why the lights were knocked out in Hawaii when they did a high-altitude nuclear test called Starfish Prime in 1962. That was one of Dr. Graham's first jobs as an Air Force defense scientist, to go figure out what knocked the lights out in Hawaii. He was basically present at the discovery. The man practically discovered the EMP phenomenon for the free world. And he's been protecting military systems since 1963. And in the process, along the way, he also happened to serve as President Reagan's White House science advisor and the director of NASA. In fact, Dr. Graham is the one who figured out the idea that the natural EMP threat from the sun once a century is something we need to worry about. I was in the room in the EMP Commission. He was walking back and forth in front of a blackboard and pointed out that, our mandate from Congress was to look at the nuclear EMP threat. But there was this natural EMP threat that most people didn't even know about. And Dr. Graham is the one that put that on our radar screen. He's just one of very distinguished people. I won't talk about all of them. There's 9 EMP commissioners, but another one, to give you a sample of the kind of expertise we have here, is a guy named Dr. John Foster. Now, Dr. Foster is one of the last surviving members of the Manhattan Project that invented the atomic bomb. And he is the free world's foremost nuclear weapons designer. All of the nuclear weapons in our current deterrent were designed by Dr. Foster, by his colleagues. Another one is Lowell Wood, Dr. Lowell Wood, who some people consider the smartest man in America because he was the science advisor to the big brain scientists who ran Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. And he is literally the most inventive American who has ever lived, or actually the most inventive person who has ever lived in the world. He holds the world record for patented inventions. Dr. Lowell Wood has patented more things than Thomas Edison. Those are 3 of the. We've also got, there's a general on the EMP Commission who used to be the deputy director of NATO. Jim Woolsey is a senior advisor to the EMP Commission. He was a director of the CIA. I used to work for Jim Woolsey when he was at CIA. And I was the senior expert on EMP for the CIA. In fact, I introduced him to the subject. And that was when I was an analyst. And ever since then, whenever I briefed Jim, ever since then, he has been one of us, one of the small group of scientists and strategic thinkers whose highest priority has been to try to educate our policymakers and the public about EMP and to try to get this country protected. And I have to tell you, it's such a disappointment to me to have heard what I heard today, that there actually for 8 years has been a scientist in the Obama administration White House who didn't understand the EMP threat. How can that happen? How can that happen 8 years, for 8 years after the EMP Commission delivered its report? There's just such gross ignorance and such political correctness. They think climate change is the biggest threat to this country, and it's EMP is the biggest threat to this civilization. There's actually very little empirical evidence for climate change, but don't get me started on that.
I think we all agree with you on that.
One of the things that I find most frustrating is it's not just that we have to combat. We have to write on a blank slate and tell people something they've never heard of before when we talk about EMP. But there's a lot of people out there who they declare themselves instant EMP experts because they've got a degree in physics, or because they've read a lot of newspaper articles on EMP or something like that. And then they are so bold that even though they are not really EMP experts, they write articles. And there was a gentleman, for example, named Mark Liu, who published an article in 38 North, which is 38 North looks at the North Korean threat. And that article basically claimed that North Korea could not pose an EMP threat to the United States because EMP was like science fiction and not a real phenomenon. And one of the arguments Mark Liu made was, well, how come when we were doing the Nevada nuclear tests, Las Vegas did not have the lights knocked out? Why weren't the automobiles paralyzed by the EMP that should have been caused by nuclear tests in Nevada? Well, the reason for that, is because the kind of EMP we're talking about results from the high altitude detonation of a nuclear weapon. The weapon has to be detonated above the atmosphere in outer space at an altitude of at least 30 kilometers high. None of the Nevada tests were exo-atmospheric tests. In fact, all of them were underground tests. There were some in the 50s before we went underground that were atmospheric tests, but none of them were exo-atmospheric tests. They were all tested within the atmosphere. The high-altitude EMP phenomena that Dr. Graham investigated in Hawaii doesn't occur unless you detonate the weapon at an altitude of at least 30 kilometers high. So there was no high-altitude EMP, and that's why the cars didn't stop and the lights weren't knocked out in Nevada. And that is so fundamental. I mean, that is so basic. How can I explain it to you? To understand EMP, if you're going to represent yourself as an EMP expert, to make a mistake like that, as Mark Liu did, to not understand that the EMP threat we're talking about is exo-atmospheric. For him to not understand that is for him to pretend that he's a brain surgeon, okay? To claim that he's a brain surgeon and to not know that the brain is located inside your skull. I mean, seriously, that's how bad a mistake that is. But you actually have, we're talking about fake news. There is a lot of fake news, and there's an incredible arrogance among a lot of people who don't know what they're talking about, who unfortunately misinform the public with their ignorance. And that's one of those examples. Misunderstanding. The other examples are that you need a high-yield weapon. The weapon has to be a very high-yield nuclear weapon in order to create an EMP threat. That is completely wrong. Even a primitive atomic bomb, if it's wafted by a meteorological balloon above an altitude of 30 kilometers, will make an EMP threat that's serious enough that it could black out the national electric grid and potentially kill millions of Americans from starvation in a year. Even a primitive, low-yield atomic bomb. Now, it's better to have a high-yield nuclear weapon. A high-yield nuclear weapon will generate more EMP than a low-yield, primitive atomic bomb. But you don't need, that high-yield nuclear weapon. Even the primitive atomic bomb will generate enough EMP that it will basically damage and destroy unprotected systems. And the worst EMP threat does not come from the very high-yield nuclear weapons. The actual worst nuclear EMP threat is actually the kind that North Korea can pose to us, frankly. There's a category, a family of weapons called super EMP weapons. They are designed to generate not a big explosion, but to put out gamma rays. The gamma rays is what creates that E1 EMP, that electromagnetic shock wave, which is the most dangerous kind of EMP that I was telling you about. This is the thing that can couple into airplanes, automobiles, and the personal computer on your desk, and basically cause really deep damage to everything. And it has a very low yield. A super EMP weapon can have a yield as low as 1 kiloton. That's 1/10 as powerful as the Hiroshima bomb. 1 to 10 kilotons. And most of the North Korean tests have been in that range. And whatever that weapon is that the North Koreans have got, after their first test in 2006, it was a low-yield test, 1 to 3 kilotons. The Russians actually warned us that the design for their super EMP weapon had leaked to North Korea. I think they transferred it to them on purpose, and they were just covering their tracks. You know, and the Russians accurately predicted to us when the North Koreans would conduct their tests in a few years, and that it would look like a super EMP weapon, so it probably is. You know, most of their weapons have been in that low-yield range. And no country has ever failed to have a successful nuclear test on its first try. So the North Korea probably does have the super already. Anyway, I know I digressed from your original question, but that's why the lights that got knocked out in Nevada, because the Nevada nuclear tests were not up to EMP tests. Well, what you want to do is you want to get the weapon for a couple of things. You need to get the, this gets a little complicated. The natural EMP that I was telling you about, okay, that's caused by the sun, causes from distorting the magnetosphere. So one thing you want to do when you're doing a nuclear EMP attack is to basically duplicate the phenomena that is caused by a natural geomagnetic storm, by detonating the weapon inside the magnetosphere. And, you have to be above the atmosphere to get into the strongest part of the magnetosphere. And to cause that, you basically use a nuclear weapon to make that geomagnetic storm. That's called the E3 EMP. But the other thing is, if you want that nuclear weapon to cause the most damaging, the most dangerous kind of EMP, the E1 EMP, this electromagnetic shock wave, you want it to be above the atmosphere, because the reason the E1 EMP happens, I was going to try to avoid talking about this, but your question forces me into this technical area. You want it to be above the atmosphere so the gamma rays will knock off electrons from the oxygen molecules and nitrogen molecules that are high in the atmosphere. This is called the Compton electron effect. It knocks the electrons off the molecules, and they orbit, they spin at near the speed of light around the magnetic lines of force. That's why the pulse is so powerful. Remember, the pulse is caused by a moving magnetic field. So now you've got this very tight magnetic field that's moving at near the speed of light. Just imagine how powerful that magnetic field is going to be, and how much area it can cover, because the EMP propagates from where the weapon is detonated to the line of sight on the horizon. So the higher up you go, the bigger and bigger that field gets on the ground. And all of those are reasons for detonating in the bulk of the atmosphere. As the weapon sinks into the atmosphere, you start losing the EMP effect, because what happens is X-rays are coming out at the same time that the gamma rays come out. And the X-rays heat the atmosphere, and basically the gamma rays can't penetrate that heated part of the atmosphere, so you don't get the Compton effect anymore. And if you're down in the atmosphere, you're not really in the best part of the magnetosphere to cause EMP either. So you lose the EMP effect as you sink down into the atmosphere. That's a little complicated, but I don't know how more simply to explain it. I hope it answers your question. I recommend a three-pronged strategy. I wouldn't ignore the federal government. I would tell your senator and congressman to get off their laurels and to join the Congressional EMP Caucus. There's no reason why they can't at least pick up the telephone and call Congressman Trent Franks, who's the chairman of the Congressional EMP Caucus, and say, sign me up. Then they'll know there'll be meetings at the Congressional EMP Caucus. They'll know about the efforts that are being made at the federal level. They can support the legislation. So they should all at least become members of the Congressional EMP Caucus. And every member of Congress and senators can become honorary members as well. And, so that's one thing that can be done at the federal level. And encourage them to support legislation at the federal level to start protecting the grid, protect our communication systems. Against EMP. Should be encouraging people who make the supervisory control and data acquisition systems. These are these little computers that are everywhere, that run everything. They control the way gas flows through a pipeline or water flows through a pipeline. There's no reason that those SCADAs can't be manufactured EMP hard. It only adds between 1% and 5% to the cost of manufacturing. If you design it into the device, it's only increasing the cost by 5% to design the thing EMP hardened. Your generator should be designed EMP hardened. You shouldn't have to be building your own Faraday cages. Why don't these things come from the factory already in automobile manufacturers? They should be designing the cars EMP hardened. You can take your family car, and for probably about $100 in material costs, you could harden your car against EMP. That should be done at the factory, So there are all kinds of things that can be done at the federal level that would be helpful, and people shouldn't ignore. I'm not saying people shouldn't ignore Washington, but I'm saying don't trust Washington and expect that Washington's going to solve this problem. Just like they're really bad at solving any kind of problem. The closer you get to the government that's closest to you, the more you get to talking to normal people like yourselves, people who still have common sense, okay? Not the inside the beltway types. The inside the beltway types who confuse progress with a report or a briefing, We want to get the problem solved. It's ridiculous that it's been 8 years since the EMP Commission. We estimated that moving at a normal pace at a non-emergency pace, it should have taken 3.5 years to get the power grid protected. We should be protected already if they were implementing the EMP Commission. The reason I came up with the idea of going to the states out of frustration with Washington. So yes, work on Washington, but I think most effort should be put at the state level, because individual states can protect themselves even if they're part of a larger grid. And then the third part of the problem is, responsible for your own family. Take the common sense measures that I've described earlier to do what the Great Generation would have done. My mother and father never heard of EMP, but they were prepared for anything. And not only would they have survived an EMP event, they probably would have had a good time. That's sort of like asking me asking me if my house catches on fire and I haven't done anything to prepare, what do I do? Okay? Once your house catches on fire and you haven't done anything to prepare, it's too late. This is the kind of a threat, like the German Blitzkrieg before World War II. The time to prepare is before the Blitzkrieg happens. The time to prepare is before we have a geomagnetic superstorm, or before we have a nuclear EMP attack or a radio frequency weapon attack. Once it happens, if you haven't done anything to prepare, it's going to be too late. But the question about what do you do after it hits is a very personal one, because it depends on your situation. Do you live in the country or the city? Have you considered where you're located? Is there a nuclear reactor nearby? Are you downwind from that nuclear reactor? Even if you're downwind from a nuclear reactor, by the way, which is kind of a worst-case situation because those nuclear reactors are likely to go Fukushima in 7 days, even under those circumstances, you can do things to prepare. If you have an emergency generator and a water supply so that you can run a garden hose, do what they were advising that people do in the civil defense manuals back in the 1950s. If you keep watering down your house, you can wash the radioactive contaminants away off your roof. The radioactive contaminants that would be likely to come from a nuclear reactor that goes to Fukushima. So even under those circumstances, if you're prepared, you could cope with a worst case scenario. Although the best solution would be, to move out of the radioactive plume and have someplace to go, with friends or a place in the country, someplace removed from these worst case scenarios. But even if you're stuck there, there's no giving up. There are things you can do if you're prepared. If you're downwind of a nuclear reactor or living in the vicinity of the nuclear reactor, you should have a Geiger counter, so that you can, with your garden hose, you can make readings to see what's going on. But the basic preparations that are what I talked about before: have a water supply, have a food supply, have a medicine kit, know how to use it. Be prepared to be able to defend your property and your people. Especially if you're in a high-risk area. Talk to your neighbors. Talk to your community. Have a plan for yourself, but also maybe you should see if you can have a plan for your neighborhood, or the town, or the city that you live in. Even a city, if it generates, even a city, even if it's bringing in electricity from elsewhere, there are things you can do in a city or a town to start being prepared. For example, if I were the mayor of the town, one of the first things you'd want to do is just take account of, well, how many people live in my town? How much food do I need to keep my people alive for a certain period of time? How much electricity does the police department need? Do the hospitals need? What kind of a plan? To come up with a plan before you're even spending any money, okay? And one of the things I would do when I was taking account of my resources is, what are my human resources living in that town and city? You'd be amazed at the amount of talent that is living among us in the form of people who are retired. There are retired doctors and engineers and military people, very smart people who live among us as retirees, who want to be productive citizens, who would like some important job to do in their retirement. It could be a great team that could work pro bono for a town or a city to do the plan for the city. That won't cost anything. It doesn't cost much of anything to just think about it and come up with a plan. And then you can start saying, well, what's the most affordable way we can do things like provide emergency generating? How much is it going to cost us to have an emergency generator with a long fuel supply for the police station? We're going to put solar panels on the roof. I mean, every town or community ought to have a safe space. I would make it an elementary school, for example. That where for sure you've got a place that's got a food supply, it's going to have air conditioning running for a long period of time, that'll have running water, someplace where you can bring the people who are most at risk in our society, the very old and the very young. And those are the people most at risk in our society from a heat wave, or if it gets too cold. So cold isn't really a problem there in Louisiana, but it would be a heat wave. Some safe place when the lights go out, so that at least you've got that, and work toward getting the whole community protected, so that maybe when the lights go out, even if they haven't done anything in your state, at least your town, your city is going to be better off. A common sense thing, if I were the mayor of the town, I'd start thinking about, most towns have a budget. I mean, this is just a small example. Most towns have a budget for planting trees and flowers and things of that sort, for beautification purposes. Maybe they should start planting apple trees, that could double, as a food supply. You have orchards for the city, in the event that the worst happens. Those are just some thoughts. I brought that very strongly. In fact, that was one of the selling points in Maine, because it's true. A huge concern for not just businesses, but especially for the military and for all parts of government, is a secure energy supply. And by the way, if you protect the grid against the worst threat, the nuclear EMP threat, it will also protect the grid from the worst-case cyber attacks, from physical sabotage, and even from severe weather like hurricanes. If you're protected from nuclear EMP, it'll be much easier to bring the grid back from all these lesser threats, or to make it invulnerable to some of these to these lesser threats. And every business wants a secure energy supply, and especially now, increasingly, people want to be secure from the ravages of worst-case cyber scenarios that might cause blackouts. In fact, it's become a criterion for military bases and for U.S. government functions, before they open a new office someplace or new base someplace, to check out what is the energy security situation. So this would make Louisiana, as one of the first states in the nation to protect itself from these threats, a very attractive. It would more than pay for itself by the new businesses that would be coming in. I wouldn't be surprised to see international businesses and foreign businesses wanting to relocate into the safe place that you would have provided by doing this. And another aspect on this is, I would encourage, as Louisiana moves forward, to have the contractors who actually do the work in protecting the Louisiana grid to come from Louisiana. This is the defense industry of the future. And not only are the other states in the United States going to want to do this sooner or later, And they're probably going to have to sooner or later as Congress moves forward mandating protection of electric grids. But other countries would like to know that have that expertise in technology. So it's a way of building a defense industry of the future within the state of Louisiana by being among the first to do it. I was just talking today to the office of the vice president. I got a phone call today from the office of the vice president. I've been asked to go and meet with the National Security Council next week to try to start moving things forward at the federal level. And Dr. Graham and I have had numerous meetings with the members of the Trump administration. All of them who take this seriously. Senior advisors to the Trump administration, for example, Newt Gingrich, have been champions of this for years. So there are people close to the president. And I personally, 2 years ago, I briefed Donald Trump when he was running for president at the Iowa caucuses. I briefed him on this. And he told me if he's elected president, he was going to knock heads together and solve this problem. And indeed, he seems to be starting to do that. But at the same time, maybe I shouldn't close with this, but I guess I will, because I found out something else today that's very, really disturbing to me, and it shows what a problem we've got with this inside the Beltway nonsense that goes on in Washington all the time. As you probably know from reading the newspapers, we're really not being governed by a Trump administration yet. All the departments and agencies, Trump's people are only just now starting to come in. Take the Department of Defense. Outside of Secretary Mattis, there's very few people who have been Trump appointees. And we're still having to deal with Obama administration holdovers. Like that scientist I told you about. Today, there's a guy working in the Trump administration, Office of Science and Technology, a holdover from the Obama administration, who didn't even know EMP is real. He's one of the scientists Obama picked. Trump will replace him eventually, but that guy is still there, and he's affecting the way decisions are being made. And there are people in the Department of Defense who are holdovers for the Obama administration, who are not only furiously working against us and trying to block our commission, trying to kill our commission, to be frank. They've been slow-rolling us, but they're even making personal attacks on me and Dr. Graham. And you don't want to count on Washington to solve this problem for you. I think Louisiana is going to be better off solving this problem on its own.
Oh, appreciate your time. Thank you. You have a good night. We appreciate it, Dr. Fry.